Hello, this is Professor James Strickler, and this is a course in American government. This lesson is from Unit 12 about the Georgia Constitution. It's Lesson 15 about Georgia education. In this lesson, you'll learn about a primary state obligation. You'll learn about the State Board of Education, about the Board of Regents, and about Hope Scholarships. In these lessons in this unit, we're working our way through the Georgia Constitution, article by article. In this lesson, we'll be primarily in Article 8 about education. In that Article 8, we learn something about what is a primary obligation of the government of the state of Georgia. The Georgia State Constitution explicitly says that public education is a primary obligation of the state. It goes on to say that this obligation concerns education that's below the level of college, and that will be given to the citizens for free. Well, who's in charge of supervising this primary obligation of the government of the state of Georgia? According to the Georgia Constitution, there will be a State Board of Education. This is one of these independent boards or commissions that we had talked about previously in this unit, although it's not listed in Article 4 with the others, because it's in its separate Article 8 here about education. But it's the same sort of thing. It's set up by the Constitution rather than by the legislature. It's going to exist whether the legislature wants it to exist or not. In addition to that State Board of Education, the Constitution provides for a state school superintendent who will be the executive officer of that Board of Education. Unlike the members of the Board of Education that are appointed, this state school superintendent is elected separately from the governor. This is another one of those plural executives, not mentioned the same part of the Constitution as the other ones, because the education stuff's all set aside for this particular part of the Constitution. But nonetheless, another one of these plural executives. So the school superintendent being elected separately, not being chosen by the governor, is in a certain sense independent of the governor. The Constitution then goes on to say that local governments, such as counties, can set up their own boards of education and maintain their own public schools. Well, how's all this schooling going to be paid for? Well, we already saw this in a previous lesson about how the state brings in revenues through the taxation system. And that is that schools are primarily funded through local property taxes. Well, now what about college level education? Even though that may not be listed as a primary obligation of the state, is it covered in the state constitution also? Yes, it is. The state constitution provides for a board of regents that will supervise the university system of the state. Matter of fact, it says that the management of that university system shall be, the power, I should say, to manage that system will be vested in this Board of Regents. So it's actually even more explicit about their authority over the system than it was for the State Board of Education over kindergarten through high schools. A final feature to consider as we think about how education is run in the state of Georgia is the Hope Scholarship Program. Georgia was one of the earliest states to adopt this sort of system, which other states have also done. It's where the state provides financial assistance to students that graduate from state high schools with a certain sort of grade point average, as so long as they agree to attend college in the state of Georgia. This is a way of trying to help keep the brightest members of the youth of the state in state, rather than having them go elsewhere. These Hope Scholarships are funded through the state lottery. So if you take all these expenses together, the collection of property taxes and other funding at the state level, and the Hope Scholarships through the lottery and all these kind of things, you add them all up, And actually, a majority of the funds spent by the state of Georgia are spent on education, which is not surprising, since it is considered a primary obligation of the state. All right, that completes this lesson. Now let's review. How high of a state obligation is public education? Is it a primary obligation? Is it a secondary concern? Is it a low priority? Or is it a private concern only? Public education is a primary obligation of the state, according to the state constitution. Who supervises Georgia public education? Is it the Secretary of State? Is it a public affairs board? Is it the Commissioner of Schools? Or is it the State Board of Education? The State Board of Education supervises public education in the state of Georgia. Who supervises Georgia higher education? Is that a State Board of Education, a state school superintendent, State Board of Regents, or local education boards? Higher education is supervised by a State Board of Regents. What funds Hope scholarships? Is it oil revenues, sales tax, the state lottery, or income tax? The state lottery funds the Hope scholarships. All right, that completes this lesson. The next lesson will also be from Unit 12. It'll be Lesson 16, the final lesson of Unit 12. Matter of fact, the final lesson of this entire course. It'll be about Georgia Home Rule and amendments to the state constitution.